He told me I wasn't smart enough for him, that I couldn't keep up. Then he left me for a 19-year-old student while we were still together. What he didn't know, I wasn't just heartbroken, I was patient. 20 years later, I watched his dream job crumble, and he still doesn't know I was the reason. This is the story of how I turned heartbreak into power and gave karma the nudge it needed. Back in the 90s, when the world was just beginning to shift into the digital age and the internet still had that dial-up buzz, I was in college, navigating the usual whirlwind of studying, friends, and life. It was during that time I met Jake. He was 23 then, already a college graduate, full of ambition and ideas, and he had this energy that made everything feel like an adventure. We met through mutual friends, but the connection between us felt almost destined. We were both about to start new chapters in our lives. Jake was moving 3,000 miles across the country for grad school, and I was preparing to live only a short 90-minute drive away with a group of friends. It was a strange, serendipitous twist of fate that we would end up so close to each other despite our different journeys. It felt like something out of a romance novel. Two people, both at pivotal moments in their lives, unknowingly charting a path that would intersect. Our conversations flowed easily, as if we had known each other far longer than we had. We had so much in common that it felt like we were constantly discovering new ways we fit together. It was undeniable. We were in love. Jake had two sisters and a younger brother who were all wonderful. From the first moment I met them, they welcomed me with open arms, and soon I became just another part of their tight-knit family. We'd spend hours chatting, laughing, and enjoying life together, and I couldn't have asked for better people to have in my life. Because Jake was a full-time student and I was working, I'd often make the drive to see him on weekends. He lived in a house with two roommates who were also in his grad program. The house was modest, not much more than a few rooms with mismatched furniture and a perpetually cluttered kitchen, but it had its own charm. Jake was a teaching assistant and a PhD student in animal sciences, so naturally, the house was often filled with the various animals he was breeding and studying. It was chaotic, sure, but it felt like home in its own wild way. We didn't have a lot of money, but we found joy in simple things: taco dates, late-night talks, and the quiet companionship of the animals around us. One of the things that grounded me in this new world was Jake's advisor's wife, Mary. She worked in the university administration and was in her mid-50s, but had this vibrant energy that made you forget her age. I'd meet her for lunch whenever I visited, and her warm, calming presence became a welcome break from the constant hum of academia and research. Her stories about life, love, and everything in between gave me a sense of stability in an otherwise unpredictable life. But all of that changed in the blink of an eye. After 2 years of dating, I was at Jake's house one weekend, lying together in bed, our bodies tangled in a mixture of intimacy and comfort. We had just spent the evening talking about everything and nothing. That's when, out of nowhere, Jake dropped a bombshell. He casually mentioned that he was concerned I had gained some weight and that it made it harder for him to feel attracted to me. His words hung in the air like a cold, sharp breeze. He wasn't concerned for my health, not even in the slightest. No, this was purely about his own superficial preferences. The weight of his words hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I sat up, my heart racing but my voice steady. "Well, if you're so concerned," I said, "maybe you should make sure there's better food for me to eat than crackers and cheese when I come up on weekends." It wasn't the most cutting response, but I wasn't about to play into his attempt to make me feel small. Even at 23, I had a sense of self-worth that wouldn't bend under his cruel judgment. I had gained maybe 10 pounds in the 2 years since we had met, but I still fit into the same clothes, still wore the same size. It was a non-issue. Jake stared at me, caught off guard by my calmness, and tried to backpedal. "Well, maybe you should try losing a little weight," he trailed off, clearly hoping I'd take the bait. I laughed a small, knowing laugh. "Nah, I'm not going to do that," I replied, my eyes locking onto his. "So, What are you going to do about it? He was silent, staring at me as if I had just spoken a language he couldn't understand. Eventually he shrugged. Well, I guess nothing.
I just wanted you to know how I felt.
I dressed quickly, not wanting to linger on this ridiculous conversation any longer. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I drove home, a quiet anger simmering inside me, but I didn't let it show. It was his issue, not mine. Things continued as usual for a while, but I felt a shift. 3 months later, Jake called me, and in that casual, detached tone that was all too familiar, he said he wanted to break up. You don't know enough about science, he said, almost apologetically, as if that was somehow a valid reason. I wasn't buying it for a second. What's the real reason? I pressed, but he stuck to his story. It felt like he was trying to push me away in a way that didn't even make sense. The truth came out a month later when Jake came by to return something of mine. I demanded to know the real reason, and with an air of guilt, he finally admitted it. He had been seeing one of his undergrad students, a 19-year-old girl named Meg. I couldn't even speak. The anger and humiliation hit me like a truck. I screamed at him to leave, and my roommate, who had been watching from the sidelines, threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't. He left without another word, and once the door slammed shut behind him, I went from furious to oddly calm. In a strange twist of fate, I started laughing. All of a sudden, everything clicked into place, the comments about my weight, the passive-aggressive remarks. It wasn't about me at all. It was about him, a coward trying to escape the relationship without ever having to confront the real issue. He didn't want to be with me, and instead of being honest, he had tried to manipulate me into breaking up with him. I emailed his roommates to let them know we'd broken up. In the early 2000s, it was how you communicated anything difficult. No awkward phone calls, just an email. In their responses, they confirmed that they had known about Meg all along and had even pressured Jake to tell me the truth. It was clear now that his excuse about not having enough scientific conversations was just that, an excuse. One of Jake's roommates, George, a super nice and undeniably cute guy, offered to help me retrieve some of my belongings from their house. Why don't you come up for the weekend, he suggested. We'll go out, have some fun, and just relax. Jake never wanted to do that, but I know you're due for a good time. It was tempting. It was exactly what I needed. A weekend to reset, to take control of my own narrative. And who knows, maybe I'd get a little revenge of my own along the way. So, that weekend, I made the drive back up to Jake's house. Only this time, I wasn't going there as a girlfriend. I was going there as a woman with a plan. George, ever the gentleman and partner in petty crime, welcomed me in while Jake was away. The house still smelled like the familiar mix of terrariums, damp wood shavings, and reptile feed, but something in the air felt different. This time, I was in control. I walked through the rooms slowly, methodically, camera in hand, one of those old disposable ones you could buy at any convenience store.
Click. Click. Click.
I documented every detail: cages, tanks, feeding setups, water sources, temperature regulators. But there was one animal in particular I was focused on, an endangered species Jake had no business keeping. It wasn't for research, not even for breeding. It was an unreleasable rescue animal he had taken in from an organization. According to the law, he had to register it, submit paperwork, and pay a simple $25 permit fee. But Jake, ever the rebellious intellectual, refused. I don't want the government in my business, he had said, arms crossed in that stubborn, smug way of his. So, I snapped a clean photo of the animal, clearly identifiable, and then another, showing a non-native, illegal species sitting casually in a tank right by a front-facing window. Anyone walking by could see it. Anyone like, say, a fish and wildlife officer. Satisfied with my little photo shoot, I got ready for the night. George and I headed out to the local bars for drinks and laughter. It was the first time in months I had felt truly free. We told jokes, danced, down tequila shots, and laughed like old friends on a new adventure. We didn't even have to say it aloud. Tonight wasn't just about fun. It was about performance. We stumbled back to the house a little after midnight. Jake and Meg were cuddled on the couch, watching TV like some awkward college rom-com. I strutted in wearing a short dress, heels in hand, hair tousled from wind and whiskey, with George practically carrying me in with a goofy smile on his face. Meg's eyes widened, and Jake's jaw clenched.
Perfect.
George, ever the co-conspirator, gave me a wink and escorted me to his room. We spent the night laughing, whispering, moaning loud enough for the walls to hear. George even made a point to walk down the hallway a few times the next morning in nothing but boxers, looking especially satisfied. The whole thing was childish, ridiculous, and utterly cathartic. I emerged in the morning in my same dress from the night before, hair delightfully messy, mascara smudged just enough to paint the picture I wanted. I sat at the table with a donut, slowly eating it in front of Jake as he fumed. "You didn't have to act like a whore in front of me," he snapped. I smiled, sweet and unbothered. George beamed beside me and planted a soft kiss on the top of my head. Meg looked mortified, embarrassed, and unsure whether to look at me, the donut, or the floor. I took one last bite, stood up, and said coolly, "Have fun with my leftovers." Then I walked out without looking back. At the time, I thought that was it, the petty theatrical night, the pointed insult. That was my revenge. But it wasn't. The next day, I had my film developed. The golden age of waiting 24 hours to relive your chaos. With photos in hand, I made a call to the State Fish and Wildlife Office. I calmly reported what I'd seen: illegal animals, poor conditions, and overcrowding of breeding tanks. The woman on the other end of the line walked me through how to make a formal report. I followed every step. Jake may have had an ego, but he didn't have many friends. Turns out his peers didn't like him. His own roommates were sick of his entitled attitude. I, on the other hand, had become quite popular among the program students. George and the other roommate decided they'd had enough. They were more than willing to submit complaints to the university, reporting Jake for sleeping with one of his undergrad students, Meg, and showing her blatant favoritism. That night at the bars, we didn't keep anything quiet. We told everyone who would listen that Jake had cheated and was now dating a student. In a small program like his, word traveled fast. With a photo sent and the report filed with the Wildlife Office, I made another call, this time to Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She already knew the sanitized version of the breakup, but not the real one. So I told her everything. "He admitted to sleeping with a student," I said. "I have it in writing." I sent her the email thread where Jake had confessed. Mary, ever the composed, gracious woman, turned icy. Her voice dropped an octave. "Thank you," she said, clipped and furious. "I'll make sure this is investigated." Before we even hung up, she was already telling her husband, Jake's academic advisor. A few weeks later, I got a call from George. He was practically giddy. "They're here," he whispered. "Fish and Wildlife. They're at the house." Officials were inspecting the property, and George, being on the lease, was more than happy to let them in. Meg was there, clueless and flustered. When questioned, she insisted everything belonged to Jake and that all of it was legal, effectively protecting George and the other roommate from any legal blowback. The agents looked around the communal areas, noting everything down. One of the illegal animals was in the backyard, giving the perfect excuse that maybe a neighbor tipped them off. But once they were in, they peeked through that front window, right where I told them to look, and saw the more problematic species. Within hours, they came back with a warrant. Jake's bedroom was searched, and the animals were all seized. The only creatures left behind? A small tank of guppies. But I wasn't finished. Jake had just been awarded an EPA grant, a major win for his PhD work, especially in animal sciences. A chunk of his research funding came directly from the federal government. So I made one more call, this time to the Environmental Protection Agency.
"Hi," I said.
I'd like to know how to report a federal grant recipient who's under investigation for illegally harboring endangered species. The voice on the other end paused. Long story short, the investigation caused his grant to be revoked. Not only that, but because he had already spent a portion of it, he was required to pay back close to $30,000. His name was flagged in the system, blacklisted from receiving any future federal research funding. He avoided jail time. The animals were in good health, and it was his first offense, but the consequences were heavy. He was hit with a $15,000 fine, lost all of his breeding animals worth thousands, and his reputation was shredded within his academic circle. The two illegal animals were relocated to a nearby nature center, where they were safe and cared for properly. For years after, whenever I was in the area, I'd stop by that center and visit them. It always gave me a strange kind of peace. They were safe. He was ruined. And I was just getting started. After everything Jake had put me through, I never could have guessed just how much life would come full circle. He somehow managed to dodge the bullet of expulsion, but the university wasn't kind. They revoked his scholarship and fired him from his teaching position for engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a student. It didn't end there. The shocking part? Jake never even bothered to hide the relationship with Meg. He didn't even wait the full 4 weeks to start publicly dating her after she finished his class. It was as though he couldn't fathom any consequences. According to the university's rules, once the semester ended and he wasn't her TA anymore, he technically could date her as long as she stayed out of his future classes. But no, Jake was far too self-assured to follow the rules. He wanted everyone to know, and I had to laugh at the sheer arrogance of it. Months later, I reached out to Jake's sisters. I told them I missed them, but felt weird contacting them after how things ended with their brother.
I didn't want to drag them into the mess.
They were shocked, and I could tell they weren't getting the full story. Jake had spun a completely different narrative. He told them that I broke up with him because of the distance, not the fact that he'd been emotionally and physically unfaithful, not the fact that he had tried to manipulate me into feeling insecure about my body. So I forwarded them the emails he had sent me after the breakup. Emails where he admitted to falling for Meg, where he apologized, saying I was too dumb to keep up with him academically, which in turn made him attracted to someone who could understand him better. Jake wasn't done with his academic career yet. He managed to convince his dad to pay for 1 more year of school, this time to finish a master's instead of the PhD he'd been aiming for. Meanwhile, I moved on with my life. I got my own master's degree, ironically, in helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to non-experts. You know, those of us who can't always remember the Latin names of animals or the specifics of scientific experiments. I started working with a variety of clients, from local doctors and pharmaceutical companies to state and federal governments, even TV and film producers. I traveled constantly, learning new things, experiencing life. Life was good. Jake, on the other hand, didn't exactly fade into obscurity. Through his siblings, I learned that he and Meg had married, had 2 kids, and that Meg had dropped out of the sciences to become an accountant. Jake went back to his old life, breeding animals again, but nothing could really bring him back to the heights he once imagined. Whenever his siblings shared little updates with me, it was clear they had their own life, separate from Jake and his. That was until one of his sisters dropped a bombshell. During her bridal shower, Jake had loudly complained about how his family still kept in touch with me, even after all these years. Apparently, his wife, Meg, didn't have a strong connection with the family, and this made Jake angry. But my old friend, his sister, shot back with the perfect response. I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers. This was how Jake's parents found out the real story, the one I had known all along. 10 years after the breakup, they learned what had really happened between Jake and me. By then, I had mostly moved on, at least I thought I had. Then, a few weeks ago, life surprised me in the most ironic of ways. I was giving a lecture at a university to a room of around 250 students, both undergraduates and grad students. As usual, I hung around afterward, chatting with a few of the students. I heard a voice from behind me. Hey, Opie. Long time no see. My heart froze for a moment, and when I turned around, I saw him, Jake. I didn't change a single muscle in my face. I was completely shocked, of course, but my instincts kicked in. I played it cool. I'm sorry, help me out. Have we met at another workshop or a lecture? He looked genuinely puzzled, so I pretended to be confused. It's me, Jake, he said.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I can't place you, but I'd love to figure it out. I acted surprised, my voice light, and then, after a dramatic pause, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake. I guess I blocked you out. It was almost too easy to fake it. Lovely to see you," I added sweetly, and I quickly turned to walk away as he tried to reach for a hug. I felt so satisfied, walking off as though nothing had ever happened between us, while he stood there, baffled and confused. Later that evening, the department chair and a few faculty members who had invited me out to dinner took me to a local restaurant. As we sat, one of them casually mentioned that Jake had been there earlier, interviewing for a teaching position. I could barely contain myself. Jake? Really? I scoffed. The others all looked at me, curious. Yeah, I said, still incredulous. I knew him from over 20 years ago. They asked how I knew him, and I could barely keep the sarcasm in check. Oh, let's just say I knew him well enough to know that he was caught in an inappropriate relationship with a 19-year-old student when he was 26, and that's why he lost his PhD and had to settle for a master's. He was fired from his teaching position for it, and that's how he left his program. The room went silent. Their eyes widened. I added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and he also got into trouble for harboring illegal animals, one of which was endangered. So, yeah, that's Jake." The department was silent for a moment. They exchanged glances, and I could see the wheels turning. Finally, one of them muttered, "Wow, we'll have to look into that." The topic was quickly changed, but I knew what had happened. Jake's chances of getting hired there had just plummeted. Then, last weekend, my old friend Mary, retired now but still keeping in touch with her colleagues, called me with some interesting news. Apparently, someone had done a background check on Jake, and when they pulled his file, they discovered all the complaints from 20 years ago, his firing, his scandal with Meg, and, of course, his illegal animals. Mary's name was still on the report, along with her husband's, who had been Jake's advisor. As a cherry on top, they found a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals, though his lawyer had successfully expunged it after he paid the fines. Still, the investigation was enough to send up a red flag, and he wasn't going to get that teaching job. As I sat there, reflecting on everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The universe, it seemed, had a way of righting wrongs. Sometimes you just need to nudge it in the right direction. The best revenge isn't always a direct attack. Sometimes it's about standing back, letting the truth slowly come to light, and watching as life works its own magic. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. If someone who's supposed to love you tries to make you feel inadequate, whether it's about your body, your intelligence, or your worth, that's their problem, not yours. You don't have to change for anyone, and you certainly don't have to stay in a relationship where you're constantly belittled. If they can't appreciate who you are, then it's time to move on, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to start looking into what they might be hiding. As for me, I'm just happy to shimmy into my now size 10 pants, knowing that I've turned the page. Life is good, and the universe? It's got my back. If you loved watching karma do its thing, and believe that sometimes the best revenge is living well and playing smart, hit that subscribe button and join us here in Revenge Valley for more jaw-dropping stories like this one. And hey, have you ever served cold revenge that still makes you smile years later? Drop your story in the comments below. We're all ears and popcorn ready.